Abigail grew up on a small farm, where the tranquility of the countryside was her only companion. After the tragedy that took her parents in a car accident when she was only 8 years old, her life changed forever. It was her grandmother, Helen, who welcomed her with all the love and care, becoming her reference of strength and wisdom. Helen, although she was already aging, never let herself get down. She knew all the herbs of the region and prepared natural remedies that cured any pain. Abigail spent hours with her grandmother, learning about traditional medicine and the power of plants. But her desire to pursue a career in medicine led her to leave the farm to study in the city. She graduated with honors, but soon realized that, despite her education, something was missing in her life. She missed the farm, the simple life she led with her grandmother, and the warmth of those afternoons in the countryside. When Abigail graduated, she thought she could conquer the world with her knowledge. But when she returned to the farm, reality set in. Her grandmother was aging quickly, and Abigail could not leave her alone. Although she had the opportunity to work at a local hospital, she decided to stay by Helen's side. It was a dilemma. Abigail knew that her future lay in medicine, but the need to care for her grandmother was more urgent. Helen, in her wisdom, knew that her granddaughter was torn between two worlds. One day, looking Abigail in the eyes, she said, "You need to go your own way, honey. I'll be fine." But Abigail, with a heavy heart, did not know how to move on. Abigail devoted herself wholeheartedly to caring for her grandmother. But the desire to pursue a career in medicine still consumed her. Even with the quiet life on the farm, she knew that something inside her was yearning for more. The city seemed far away, yet so close at the same time, with all the opportunities she had ever dreamed of. Yet every time she thought about leaving her grandmother, her heart ached. Helen needed her more than ever. Life at the hospital was not what she had imagined. There was so much bureaucracy, so much politics, and above all, an emotional distance that she could not bear. Although medicine was her passion, working there left her increasingly frustrated. She missed the human connection she had with the patients on the farm, where everything seemed simpler and more authentic. Meanwhile, Helen continued her life with dignity, but her health was deteriorating faster than Abigail had imagined. Her steps were slower, her hands were shaking, and she complained of constant pain. Abigail knew she had to make a difficult decision: return to the city and pursue a successful career, or stay and be Helen's caregiver, knowing that by doing so she would be giving up her own dreams. One rainy afternoon, while Helen was relaxing in a rocking chair on the porch, Abigail went out to get some medicine in town. During the drive, her mind wandered. She was trying to decide between the two lives that lay ahead of her. She didn't know if she could follow her dream without feeling guilty about abandoning her grandmother, but she also didn't want to regret not trying. It was at that moment that Abigail encountered something unexpected, something that would change the course of her life forever. While paying for her medicine at the local pharmacy, she bumped into Luke. It was at the moment when the coins fell from the pharmacy counter that Abigail saw her destiny take an unexpected turn. She quickly bent down to pick up what had fallen, and when she looked up, she saw a welcoming smile. Luke was there, trying to help. He was a tall man, with dark hair and eyes that always seemed attentive, as if he knew exactly what to say or do in any situation. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," Luke said with a genuine smile, as he picked up the last coins that had escaped to the floor. "Don't worry," Abigail replied, still a little embarrassed. She felt a little uncomfortable being there, in the city, with her thoughts so confused. But Luke's smile made her feel, somehow, lighter. The two chatted for a few minutes as they picked up the money that had fallen. Luke talked about his life in the city, and although he was a successful-looking man, there was something about his manner that made him seem much more approachable than the other men she had known. He didn't seem to be trying to impress her, but rather, He was genuinely interested in what she had to say. "I've never seen you around here before," Abigail said, trying to hide her curiosity, but failing. "Are you from out of town?" "Yes, I just moved here," Luke replied. "I'm trying to get used to it, but it seems like every time I go back to the country, the city noise bothers me more." Abigail felt an instant connection. She didn't know much about him, but she felt like there was something there. There was something special there. They continued their conversation for a few more minutes, laughing and sharing stories about life in the city and in the country, until Luke suggested that they meet again. Abigail accepted, a little surprised by her own answer, but also feeling that there was something good in this unexpected encounter. "I would love to," she said, smiling. The meetings between Abigail and Luke began to become more and more frequent. They saw each other almost every day, exchanging stories and laughing about the little things in life. Abigail began to feel a strong connection with him, something she had never experienced before. He was smart, funny, and had a way of talking that made everything seem lighter. But there was something about Luke that made her wonder, why didn't he talk much about himself? Although Abigail had talked about her life in the country, her grandmother, and how much she loved medicine, Luke always deflected questions about his past. He avoided talking about his family or the reason he had moved to the city. Abigail thought this was strange, but she didn't want to press him, thinking that perhaps he had his own personal reasons for keeping it a secret. What Abigail didn't know was that Luke came from a very wealthy family, but for some reason he didn't like to talk about it. His father, Charles, had died in a car accident when Luke was young, and the loss had affected him deeply. Then his grandfather, Thomas, had an accident and been left in a coma, but Luke never wanted anyone to know that he had inherited a large fortune. He was afraid that Abigail would see him as a privileged man, and he didn't want her to judge him for it. Still, what Luke felt for Abigail was real, and he could no longer hide his admiration for her. She was different from any woman he had ever known. She had a simple outlook on life, but at the same time, there was a depth to her words that drew him in. As much as he wanted to tell the truth about his family and his life, Luke was afraid that doing so would change the way Abigail saw him. He was afraid she would think he was just another rich man with no purpose. But with each meeting, he felt himself falling more in love with her, and it made him want to be honest, even if it was difficult. One day, as they were walking through town, Abigail couldn't help but notice how nervous he seemed, as if he were about to say something important. But as always, he remained silent, and Abigail decided not to push. Something told her that eventually Luke would reveal what he was hiding. As Abigail spent more time with Luke, she began to forget a little about her worries about her grandmother's health. The moments with him were light and pleasant, and she felt a connection she had never felt before. However, her worries about Helen never left her mind completely at peace. Helen's health was getting worse by the day. She seemed more tired, and her eyes, once so lively, were now dull, as if the life was slowly draining from her. Abigail tried not to show how affected she was, but it was impossible to hide her fear. She knew that if she didn't do something quickly, Helen might not survive much longer. One cold morning, while Abigail was making coffee for her grandmother, she noticed that Helen hadn't gotten out of bed as usual. Abigail ran upstairs to find her grandmother struggling to breathe. Her skin was pale, and she seemed too weak to stand. It was then that Abigail decided to call an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed the worst. Helen was having a heart attack. The diagnosis was devastating. She had a progressive heart condition, and she needed urgent surgery to survive. Abigail was devastated. Although she had read about this type of surgery and had some medical knowledge, she knew that the cost would be astronomical. Helen's farm was not worth even a third of what it would take to cover the cost of the procedure. Abigail was desperate. She didn't want to sell the farm, because that would mean losing everything her grandmother had built over her lifetime. But without enough money, what else could she do? That's when Luke called. He knew something was wrong, and without Abigail asking, he made a proposal that left her speechless. He would offer half the money needed for the surgery, but only if Abigail accepted. Abigail hesitated. She didn't want to accept help, especially from someone she barely knew. But her grandmother's health was at stake, and she knew she had no other choice. With a heavy heart, she accepted the offer, even though her soul was conflicted. After helping Abigail with the first part of the payment for Helen's surgery, Luke began to visit the farm more often. He offered to help with anything she needed, from the transportation to daily care. Abigail, although grateful, still felt an internal discomfort. She didn't know if she could accept so much from someone so new and, apparently, so far from her reality. While Abigail was immersed in her responsibilities, the relationship between her and Luke grew. However, she couldn't help but wonder why he was so willing to help. What did he expect in return? Abigail couldn't ignore the fact that Luke was always there when she needed him most, but the issue of his past still loomed like a shadow. He had been sincere in everything he said, but the silence about his personal life still bothered her. It was on a quiet evening, while the two were drinking tea on the porch of the farmhouse, that Abigail decided to confront him. "Why are you doing this for me, Luke? It's not just out of sympathy, right? I want to understand." Luke was silent for a moment, looking at the stars in the sky. He seemed to hesitate. He finally took a deep breath and looked at Abigail with a serious expression. "I'm not as good as you think," he said, his voice filled with a sadness Abigail had never heard before. "My life, my family, there are things I need to hide, things you wouldn't understand." Abigail felt the weight of the word hide. She wanted to ask more, but she didn't know if she should press. Luke seemed to be struggling with something deep inside, and as much as she wanted to know the truth, she didn't want to push him. She knew he had his own internal struggles, and she didn't want to be the reason he opened up before he was ready. In that moment, Abigail realized something important. She didn't need to know everything about him to trust him. Luke was there, not out of obligation, but for a reason that, while still hidden, seemed genuine. And as much as it scared her, she knew there was something real about what was happening between them. But what Abigail didn't know was that the secret Luke had been keeping was about to be revealed in a way she could never have imagined. As the days passed, Abigail and Luke continued to see each other frequently. Helen's health was still a constant concern, but the surgery was scheduled, and the doctors seemed optimistic. Abigail was beginning to get used to the idea that perhaps, with time, things would improve. Even so, she still felt the pressure of responsibility on her shoulders. Then, one afternoon, Luke showed up at the farm with a slightly different smile. He looked like a determined man, and there was something in his eyes that made Abigail feel even more uncomfortable. He invited her to take a walk around the property, something they hadn't done in a while. During the walk, Luke stopped and looked Abigail directly in the eyes. "I know things aren't easy for you," he began, "and I don't want you to think I'm trying to buy your trust or make you feel indebted to me. I want to help. I can help more, in ways you're not expecting." Abigail looked at him, a little confused. "Help more how?" Luke hesitated, and his expression grew more serious. "What I mean is, if you need more money to cover the cost of surgery or anything else, I can help. It doesn't have to be a loan or something that has to be paid back. I can give it to you without you having to worry." Abigail was shocked. She knew Luke had resources, but she never imagined he would offer to give so generously. Her stomach tightened. "I can't accept this, Luke. I can't just take this kind of help without knowing where it's coming from. It's not right." Luke looked at her calmly, but there was an intensity in his eyes that Abigail couldn't ignore. "It's not a favor. I'm offering it because I want you to know that you can count on me. Not because you need me, but because I care. And this isn't about money, Abigail. It's about you." Abigail was silent, feeling the weight of Luke's offer and the way it made her feel. She wanted to reject it, but at the same time, she didn't know how. What Luke was offering seemed to be more than just money. It seemed to be a promise of support, an offer of a future together. But at the same time, she couldn't help but wonder, what was the real reason behind all of this? In the days that followed, Abigail couldn't get Luke's offer out of her head. She knew he cared about her, but something inside her resisted. After all, how could she accept such generous help from someone she barely knew? It was as if there was an invisible layer of mystery surrounding Luke, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, but it made her uneasy. She continued to care for Helen, who was recovering well after surgery, though the process was slower than expected. Abigail tried to hide her concern, but her grandmother's eyes were always watchful, as if she knew something was happening. "Are you okay, honey?" Helen asked one night when Abigail was changing the sheets on her bed. "You've been thinking about something else?" Abigail hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She wanted to tell her grandmother about Luke, but at the same time she knew that Helen worried too much. "I'm fine, Grandma," she replied, trying to smile. "Just thinking about things." But there was something else. Something strange that Abigail had begun to notice in Henry, Luke's grandfather, as she cared for him. The changes were small, almost imperceptible, but Abigail was attentive. Henry's blanket would often fall off the bed, and sometimes his body would seem to be in a different position than she had left it. She tried to ignore these small changes, but an uneasy feeling would creep over her whenever she walked into the room. One morning, when she went to change Henry's bedclothes, Abigail noticed something even stranger. He was more relaxed than ever, as if he were resting, and his fingers were slightly curled, as if he had recently moved. She looked around, searching for any logical explanation. The window was closed, and there was no wind to move the blanket or change its position. The room was too quiet. Suddenly, Abigail had an idea, and although she was a little wary, she couldn't ignore what was happening. She began to think that perhaps Henry wasn't as comatose as everyone thought. What if he was faking it? But why? What would he gain from it? What had seemed like a simple case of care was becoming a more complex issue, and Abigail found herself faced with a choice. Should she continue to care for him as if nothing was happening, or should she investigate what was behind these mysterious changes? She didn't know, but the truth seemed closer than she imagined. For the next few days, Abigail couldn't stop thinking about what she had observed in Henry's room. The feeling that something was wrong consumed her, but she was hesitant to act without knowing for sure. What was wrong with Henry? Was he really faking a coma? If so, why would he do this? One quiet night, while she was going about her usual routine of caregiving, Abigail decided to summon up the courage to confront Henry. She cautiously entered the room, closing the door behind her. Henry stood there, quiet as always. Abigail looked at him and in a firm voice said, "I know you can hear me, Henry. I don't know why you're pretending to be in a coma, but I need you to tell me the truth." She waited a moment, but heard nothing. Then, with a sigh, she moved closer to him and repeated, "If you have something to hide, you can trust me. I know you're conscious, and I know you're trying to communicate something." Then, to Abigail's surprise, a low, husky voice answered, "You're right, Abigail. I'm not in a coma. I've been pretending for a month." Abigail stood there, unsure of what to say. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What's going on?" Henry took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm in danger, Abigail. My family is trying to kill me." Henry's words sounded absurd and disturbing. Abigail didn't know if she believed him or if she was just imagining things. But he sounded so sincere, so desperate, that she couldn't ignore what he said. "My stepmother, Evelyn, and a man, they cut the rope that held me during the accident in the mountains. And now they're trying to kill me again." Abigail was shocked, trying to process what she had just heard. She sat down in the chair. next to Henry's bed, trying to comprehend. But why didn't you tell me this before? Why pretend to be in a coma? I needed time, Henry replied with a sigh. I needed proof, something that could prove the truth. And I can't trust anyone in my family. My stepmother, Evelyn, she just wants my fortune. And now, she wants to destroy me. Abigail looked at him, frightened. Do you have a will? Something that proves all this is true. Yes, Henry replied, but it's not enough. I needed more proof. I need you to help me. Abigail, I know I can trust you. Abigail felt a huge weight on her shoulders. She was about to get involved in something much bigger than she had imagined. But at the same time, something inside her told her that she couldn't leave Henry alone. He was telling her the truth, and she knew she had to help. I'll help you, Henry, but we have to act fast, and we have to be careful. The tension was growing with each passing minute. Abigail didn't know exactly what to do, but one thing was clear. Her life was about to change in ways she had never expected. She imagined. For the next few days, Abigail and Henry kept their conversation a secret. She knew she had to act quickly, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. Henry was right. Her family, especially her stepmother, Evelyn, was involved in something much deeper and more dangerous than Abigail had imagined. With each passing day, she became more convinced that something was truly wrong with the family. So she took what seemed like the next step. She decided to tell Luke. It wasn't easy, but she knew she needed someone she trusted to help her gather evidence and bring the truth to light. When she explained what she had learned about Henry and the conspiracy involving her stepmother, Luke was stunned. He had never imagined that his own family would be involved in something so dark. I knew my mother wasn't easy to deal with, but this is more than I could have imagined, Luke said, his face pale. I never knew Evelyn was capable of something like this. They needed proof, and to that end, Abigail and Luke made a plan. Henry suggested that they use a voice recorder to record any compromising conversations between Evelyn and her lover. Abigail, though nervous, agreed to go along with the plan. She knew it was her only chance to save Henry and finally uncover the truth. 3 days later, Evelyn showed up at Henry's house. She and the man she was talking to seemed unconcerned, unaware that they were being recorded. They talked about how to eliminate Henry once and for all, and how Henry's fortune would be theirs. It was all Abigail and Luke needed. With the recording in hand, Luke went straight to the police. They were able to open a formal investigation, and within hours, Evelyn and her lover were arrested and taken to prison. The truth was finally out, and the conspiracy that Henry had feared was exposed. For Abigail, the heaviness she had felt disappeared, but a new feeling took hold: gratitude. She had helped Henry escape a horrible fate, and in return, she had discovered the true meaning of trusting others. And although her relationship with Luke had been marked by secrets, they were now closer than ever. In a gesture of pure kindness, Henry, now fully recovered, invited Abigail and Luke to dinner at the farm. He was determined to start his life over, and with Abigail, he began to seek the peace that had been denied him for so many years. During dinner, Henry looked at Abigail with tears in his eyes and said, "I never imagined I would find someone like you, someone who would believe in me. You gave me a new chance at life." Abigail smiled, but something in her eyes changed. She knew that life would never be the same after everything she had been through. Henry's past had been revealed, and with it, she also discovered more about herself and the true value of trust and courage. What began as a simple friendship with Luke had turned into something much deeper. And although the future was uncertain, Abigail knew she was no longer alone. Together, they had faced the secrets of their past and overcome the greatest challenge of their lives. And so the story of Abigail, Luke, and Henry comes to an end. They faced the secrets of a broken family, unmasked the conspiracy and found something more important: mutual trust and the strength to move forward despite the challenges.